Hello friends and students. In this video tutorial, we'll be discussing membrane transport or transport across the membrane. Since we know we have large number of cells and these cells need oxygen, they need to give off carbon dioxide, and these cells need to take the nutrients, they need to excrete out the waste products. For that reason, there should be a continuous transport of substances from outside to inside and from inside to outside. If we want to see what type of transport is involved, how the transport is taking place, and this will be covered in this topic, that's membrane transport. How the transport of substances are being carried out across the membrane. Membrane transport is broadly divided into two types. One is the passive transport. And second is active transport. We have passive transport and active transport. Passive transport, the prerequisite condition for passive transport, the important requisite for passive transport is that it should follow a gradient. There should be a gradient. Number one. And number second, it does not involve expenditure of any energy. No energy is required. No energy is required for passive transport. So we have, it must follow a gradient. What does gradient mean? Gradient means when the things will be moving from an area of higher concentration to the area of lower concentration. For example, if we see this is a cell, if something is more here, if the concentration of a particular substance is more in this area as compared to its concentration inside the cell, then there is a natural tendency. The natural tendency is the shift of the substances from an area of higher concentration to the area of lower concentration. And when the shift occurs without any expenditure of energy, and second thing, following a gradient, we can say such type of transport as passive transport. This passive transport has several types. When we see, there are different types of passive transport. Basically, when we divide this membrane transport, it is broadly of two types. One is the passive transport, and second is the active transport. The active transport we will discuss in another video lecture, and this passive transport we are going to discuss today. The passive transport is of three types. One is the diffusion, simple diffusion. Second is facilitated diffusion. And the third type of transport is open channel transport, which we call as osmosis. Passive transport is divided broadly into three types: diffusion, facilitated diffusion, and open channel transport, or the second name for it is osmosis. Let us discuss them one by one. First of all, we will discuss this diffusion, then facilitated diffusion, then open channel transport. But in all the three cases, the essential condition that we require is that it must follow a gradient. And there is no expenditure of any energy. Let us discuss diffusion. Normally we say, whenever we define the diffusion, we say it is the movement of substances from an area of higher concentration to the area of lower concentration. For example, if we insert one sugar cube in a water, definitely the sugar will move from an area of higher concentration to the area of lower concentration until the concentration becomes equal. For example, if we have something here and this substance which is present here is at higher concentration, and here it is at lower concentration. there is a natural tendency that the substances will move from an area of higher concentration to the area of lower concentration until the concentration outside and inside becomes equal. Diffusion will be carried out up to the extent when the concentration inside and outside of the membrane becomes equal. Okay, see, this diffusion is possible across the membrane. It is possible across the membrane. There are a large number of substances which cross the cell membrane by diffusion. For example, you have carbon dioxide, you have oxygen, you have vitamin A, you have alcohol. All the things get diffused through the membrane from an area of higher concentration to the area of lower concentration. When we say gradient, this gradient is a broad term. This gradient is a broad term. We have three types of gradients. One is the simple, which we call as concentration gradient. Second is partial pressure gradient. And the third is electrochemical gradient. We have three types of gradients. One is concentration gradient. Second is partial pressure gradient. And the third is electrochemical gradient. When we discuss concentration gradient is valid for the diffusion of those substances which do not have any charge. We can say, for example, we have neutral solutes. We have neutral solutes. In case of neutral solutes, what is being followed? It is the concentration gradient. It means neutral solutes are going to move from an area of higher concentration to the area of lower concentration. Right. Second part is partial pressure gradient. So far as gases are concerned, there is no concentration gradient. The better term for this is the better term for explaining the gradient in terms of gases is partial pressure gradient. Partial pressure gradient means, for example, if the partial pressure of oxygen outside the cell is more and partial pressure of oxygen inside the cell is less, then what is going to happen? There is a pressure difference. Outside pressure is more, inside pressure is less. This will create a pressure difference, and pressure difference always creates a force. By this force, oxygen is going to move from outside of membrane to the inside of membrane. Therefore, partial pressure gradient is also explaining the diffusion. We will say movement of gases from an area of higher partial pressure to the area of lower partial pressure is also diffusion. And we have one more gradient, that is electrochemical gradient. Electrochemical gradient means there is a difference of electropositivity, electronegativity. For example, if we have increased positive potential outside, or we have increased levels of potassium ions outside, and inside the cell there are less number of potassium positives. What will happen? We have here the gradient. There is a sort of gradient. We have here more electropositivity, and here we have less electropositivity. Or we can say this is more electropositive. Comparatively, this is electronegative. It means potassium has to move from an area of more electropositive, or from a region where there is more electropositivity, to a region where is comparatively electronegativity. So for charged solutes, if we want to see the diffusion of charged solutes, the charged solutes are going to move from an area of higher positive potential to the area of lower positive potential. These are the three types of gradients which are involved in diffusion. Second part, apart from diffusion, one more thing is there, one more point. What are the type of substances which are going to diffuse through the membrane? We should remember all the time that since the membranes are lipophilic, all the lipophilic substances, those substances which are lipophilic, are going to get diffused from outside of the membrane to the inside. This is one thing. So diffusion of substances is taking place across the membrane, but only those substances which are lyophilic. Second part is facilitated diffusion. This is another type of diffusion in which in which, since it is the type of passive transport, the prerequisite conditions are same. It must follow the concentration gradient, number one. Number second, there should be no expenditure of energy. No expenditure of energy should be there. Facilitated diffusion is again a type of diffusion which is being facilitated by something. And who is going to facilitate this? It will be facilitated by channel proteins, or it will be facilitated by carrier proteins, channel proteins or carrier proteins. See, these channel proteins are further of two types: open channel proteins, and second, gated channel proteins. So channel proteins are further divided into open channel proteins and gated channel proteins. See, what is going to happen in this type of transport, in this type of diffusion? For example, if we talk of cell membrane, there we have some proteins. We have some proteins sandwiched in between the two phospholipid bilayers. You must be well versed about the structure of plasma membrane. What is going to happen in this protein? This protein starts from one side of the membrane to the another side. In this type of protein, there is a particular channel. For example, this is a channel. And what is going to happen? Things are going to move from this side to the other side, but it will depend upon the concentration gradient. Certainly, this type of we can say channel protein transport or open channel transport is again a type of diffusion which is being facilitated by the presence of this carrier, which is being facilitated by the presence of this open channel. See, this open channel transport is subpacific. Subpacific in the sense, if we see, the channel has some dimensions, and the dimension of the substance which is going to pass through this channel must correspond with the dimensions of the lumina of this channel. Therefore, we can conclude this type of transport is going to be subpacific. Only subpacific substances whose size corresponds to the size of this channel are going to get transported from this side to another side. Now, this is so far as open channel is concerned. What about gated channel? It is very simple. Again, we have this type of channel. But this channel, in case of gated channel, has something which we call as gates. It has gates. These gates will open only when the substance has to diffuse, and these will get closed when we do not require the substance to get diffused. So these two gates will be responding to some stimuli, and the type of stimuli is chemical stimulus, or they may respond to some electrical stimulus. Therefore, the gates of this channel is going to open when there is some sort of chemical stimulus or when there is some sort of electrical stimulus. For example, I will tell you voltage gated potassium channels. We have a very famous example, voltage gated potassium channels. What is going to happen if the concentration of potassium ions outside the membrane is more, and if the same potential inside the membrane is less, therefore there is a gradient, electrochemical gradient, and at the same time the potassium is being transported across the membrane with the help of gated channel which has gates, and definitely there is more electropositive potential, there is less electropositive potential. So there is an electrical stimulus. This electrical stimulus will open up the gate and potassium channels will diffuse from one side of membrane to the another side. This way we can explain the transport of potassium ions with the help of gated channels. Since I told you facilitated diffusion is by means of open channels and gated channels. Second is, it is also facilitated with the help of carrier proteins. Now, one thing which we need to understand here, whenever we talk of carrier proteins carrier proteins are basically involved in active transport. But there are some carrier proteins, which are getting involved in facilitated diffusion. And such type of carrier proteins have a special name. We call them as permeases. Permeases are those carrier proteins which are involved in facilitated diffusion. Otherwise, carrier proteins are always involved in active transport. But we have some special kind of carrier proteins which are named as permeases. They are involved only in case of facilitated diffusion. Again, if we see the membrane, and we have some proteins here, which we call as carrier proteins. If this is a carrier protein, we can say this is permease. This carrier protein is involved in facilitated diffusion. We will call it as permease. It is going to move the substance from this side to another side. For example, we have transport of glucose. In case of RBCs and liver. Glucose is going to get transported from an area of higher concentration to the area of lower concentration. It depends whether it is going inside the cell or it is moving from the cell to the outside. It will depend upon the concentration of glucose. If the concentration of glucose is higher in the interior of the cell, glucose will move from within the cell to the outside. Or if it is more outside, it is going to move towards the inside. Understand? This is what happens in case of facilitated diffusion. One more thing we have, the last thing in case of passive transport, the last type of passive transport, which we call as open channel transport. We also call it as osmosis. So far as this membrane is concerned, this membrane has a phospholipid bilayer, and phospholipid bilayer is water eating. Water is not going to get transported from one side of cell to the other side because we have lipophilic phospholipid bilayer. What is going to happen? Definitely the cells require water, and where water is being transported, not only water, but water soluble substances are also going to get transported from one side of the membrane to the another side. How it is going to take place? It is going to take place by osmosis. For example, we have a lipid bilayer, and we have a type of protein which we call as tunnel proteins. We have a type of proteins which we call as tunnel proteins or transmembrane proteins. We have a type of protein known as tunnel protein or transmembrane protein. This transmembrane protein has water channel in it. It has a channel which we call as aqua channel or water channel. Although we can understand water is not going to get diffused through this phospholipid bilayer because phospholipid bilayer is lipophilic. It will not allow hydrophilic substances to pass across. What is going to happen when we see this protein, tunnel protein, having the channel, this tunnel protein has a channel, and this channel is going to move water and water soluble substances by the process of osmosis. That means it is going to move from an area of lower solute concentration to the area of higher solute concentration. This process we call as osmosis. Remember, if we see in case of living system, in case of human cells, what is possible? Active transport is also possible and passive transport is also possible. If we see in non-living substances, if we see, for example, we have more air here, we have less air there, so certainly we have partial pressure difference. Air will move from this area to another area. So in case of non-living things, transport which is involved is always passive. But in case of human beings, there is passive transport which is taking place. In addition to passive transport, we have active transport also. That means active transport is a type of transport in which the substances are going to move from an area of lower concentration to the higher concentration. See, if we see this passive transport, what thermodynamics say about passive transport? As per the laws of thermodynamics, delta G is equal to RT log of C2 by C1. For example, this is membrane, and here we have some concentration of substance, and we consider it C2 by C1. It is delta G is equal to R2 C2 by C1. And here we have some concentration of this substance. Okay? If we consider this C1 is here and C2 we have here. If C1 is greater than C2, the concentration of that substance is higher here, the concentration of the same substance is lower here. We say C1 is greater than C2. What is going to happen? As there is a natural tendency, the substances will move from C1 to C2. See, we will see whether it is applicable as per the thermodynamic laws. We will follow this formula, delta G. For any spontaneous process, delta G must be negative. For any spontaneous process, delta G must be negative. Delta G is equal to RT. R is gas constant, T is temperature. It is also constant. Log of C2 by C1. C1 is higher, C2 is lesser. C1 is higher, C2 is lesser. It means it is higher, it is lesser. Lesser by higher, log of lesser by higher is negative. Delta G comes out to be negative because R and T is constant. So this is a spontaneous process, and things will move from an area of higher concentration to the lower concentration is well explained by the principles of thermodynamics. That's all about passive transport. In our next video lecture, we'll be discussing what is active transport and what are the various types of active transport. If you like this video, definitely click on the like button, and if you really want more videos, kindly do not forget to subscribe my channel. Thank you very much.